Yeah, my name is Tim Bale and I'm Professor of Politics at Queen Mary University of London, and I run something called the Party Members Project. The ESRC funded Party Members Project looks at the Conservatives, looks at the Labour Party, looks at the Lib Dems, looks at the SNP, the Greens and UKIP. So we've got a pretty good ideological spread. And that also means we have a fairly good demographic spread, in as much as there is much demographic variation in party members. Well, party members are actually a vital part of democracy in the UK. They have several functions for parties. The most obvious is, of course, they deliver the electoral campaign on the ground. Voluntary labour is incredibly important. The other thing that they do for their parties is to select the candidates that the parties put up at elections. So in all cases, the person who stands for Parliament in your constituency will have been through a selection process against other hopefuls, and the decision made as to who will stand for the party depends on the local members of the party. So they're important for selection, they're important for elections, and they're also actually important in terms of what the parties stand for, because party members to some extent provide, if you like, the centre of gravity of any party. They prevent the MPs of that party, the leadership of that party, spinning off out of control, if you like, and moving too far away from the party's original ideological aims. That's not to say that they can't move with the times or that they don't move with the times, but they to some extent provide a bit of an anchor for parties, and that again is actually quite important for voters as well, because voters need to have some sort of shortcut sense of what parties stand for, I think, and if parties were simply kind of free-floating searchers for votes, as it were, I think that would make quite a profound difference to the electoral process and to the way that voters could or couldn't rely on parties to kind of represent their world views, if you like. People began to study party members in detail, really, at the beginning of the 1990s in the UK, when two political scientists, Pat Side and Paul Whiteley, first conducted surveys of the Labour Party, first of all, and then the Conservative Party. Up until then, we only really had kind of guesses about what party members were like, what they thought, who they were, and what they wanted out of politics, if you like. And their research, therefore, was actually pretty groundbreaking. It was really the first time we had any idea, any scientific idea, anyway, about membership in this country. The problem came in the fact that their research was so interesting in some ways that it got a lot of media profile, and it's revealed some things that the parties didn't want revealing. So, for example, the average age of the Conservative Party member was, in his or her low 60s, and that's not something the Conservative Party particularly wanted to have shouted from the rooftops.
It's all right for some of you. Half of you won't be here in 30 or 40 years' time.
So once Pat and Paul had done those initial surveys, it became more difficult to get the cooperation of political parties to do further surveys, which meant there's been a big gap, if you like, between those initial surveys in the 1990s and the surveys that we ourselves have conducted more recently. We first began after the 2015 election. We've managed to close that gap by, in some senses, using new technology. We use a firm called YouGov, which has a massive internet panel of hundreds of thousands of people, which allows us to draw sufficient numbers of members in order to be able to send them surveys without having to go through the parties first. And that affords us the ability to ask them sometimes quite awkward questions for the parties, and allows us obviously to update Patton Paul's work to see if the things that they found in the 1990s still hold good in the 21st century. Now we're getting towards the third decade of the 21st century. The main contribution of our work and the main way we're moving things on is firstly to update, secondly to ask some comparative questions, and also to add in some things that haven't been done before. One example of this would be the fact that when we first conducted our surveys in 2015, we also conducted surveys of people who really, really like those political parties but don't actually join them. Now, the advantage of doing that then is that it allows us to come up with a better answer as to why people join political parties, because in order to know why some people do join, it's quite useful to know why some people don't join and the differences between people who do and don't join, and that's something that hadn't been done before. A second example would be in 2017 we also conducted a survey of people who left their political parties. Previously, researchers have been very interested in why people join, as I've just said, but if you actually go beneath the headline figures of party members, you realise there's a lot of churn. A lot of people leave as well as a lot of people join. So getting at why people don't stay, why they abandon their parties is also something quite interesting, and obviously has huge practical relevance for the parties themselves, because they want to hang on to members. And then finally, I'd say we've been very lucky in some ways to conduct this research at the same time as there's been a huge surge in membership, particularly in the Labour Party and particularly in the Scottish National Party. So some of what we've done has been able to explain that surge. So all in all, I think it's been a very useful project, and hopefully it'll increase public understanding of members, but it'll also possibly benefit the parties themselves, and they might know now a little bit more about what they need to do to attract members, and not only to recruit but to retain them. Yeah, the key findings of the project, I think, firstly relate to the demographics of party membership. It is very obvious if you look at membership right across the board, although it varies a little bit between parties, but not as much as you might think, that joining a political party is very much a middle class sport, if you like. About 2/3 to 3/4 of all party members right across the board, with the exception of UKIP actually, could be classified as middle class, in the sense that they are, if you like, ABC1 voters, to use that kind of jargon. They're also thoroughly middle-aged. It's only the Greens that have an average age below sort of the mid-40s. Other parties, including the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, we're talking about an average age in their mid-50s. If you look at the Conservative Party individually, you find that some 40% of their members are aged over 65. If you look at the ethnicity of parties across the board, it is unbelievably white British. No party that we looked at had a proportion of ethnic minority members that exceeded 3-4%. So really, they are 95+% white. Then if you look at some of the other findings, when we look at why people join political parties, you see a big disconnect between why people think they join and why they actually join. Because if you ask people, even people who actually like the parties, why they think it is that other people join them, they think it's very much a kind of slightly self-interested, kind of career motivated thing to do, or they think that people join because their family members or their friends are already members. Actually, if you look at the members themselves, that isn't generally the case. Joining for career reasons, because you think it will give you some advantage, is a negligible motivation for most party members. At least that's what they will tell you anyway, and we always have to be careful about that, because of course we're relying to some extent on people's honesty when in survey questions, The overwhelming reason people join is because they're interested in politics and they really, really care about the values that the various parties promote. And that actually isn't much of a change from what Pat Syed and Paul Whiteley found in the 1990s. In other words, people who join political parties are quite ideological creatures, and they join primarily because they really believe in the parties that they join and they want to help them win elections and get into government. So if you look, for example, at politics currently, you will see that Labour has lost quite a lot of members due to the rather ambivalent stance that the party leadership has taken on Brexit, for example. We've also been able to say quite a lot about why some people campaign for their parties and why others don't, and that also has a great deal to do with ideology as well. We've been able to look at why some people are keener on online campaigning rather than offline campaigning, and that's to do with parties encouraging people to feel kind of embedded in their local party. If you feel that you're in a kind of social network, then you're much more likely to do the kind of offline activities that we associate traditionally with political parties, like knocking on people's doors or delivering leaflets, etc. If you don't really feel connected locally, then you might still campaign, but you'll be doing the kind of collectivism, as some people rather dismissively call it. You'll be on Twitter, you'll be on Facebook, etc., but you won't actually, get out of your house and do the hard yards. Now, that's not to say actually that the stuff online isn't important, because increasingly it is, but there are differences there. And activism also has a little bit to do with demographics, but perhaps not as much as some people might expect. One interesting finding as well about activism is that people who really like political parties but don't join them do actually do quite a lot for those parties at election times. They don't do some of the very high intensity activities. So in other words, they're a bit less keen to go canvassing, for example, or even leafleting, but they will do other activities for the party. They don't do as much as fully paid up members, but the point here is that there are far, far more people who like political parties and don't join them than there are people who like them and do join them. So actually, when you add it all up, the contribution of, if you like, non-member supporters of political parties at election time is really actually very significant. We should care about who party members are for a number of reasons. The first, I think, is that they are absolutely crucial in selecting candidates. And given that so many seats in the UK's first past the post system are actually quite safe seats, it is a truism to say that in fact it's not the voters who pick the MPs, it's actually party members who pick the MPs. Therefore, if we have a very unrepresentative bunch of people who are party members and are doing the selecting, we could find we actually have an even more unrepresentative bunch of people who end up as MPs. And I'm talking not just demographically, but I'm talking about ideologically as well. So I think that's one very important thing. The other thing I think is important is, and I'm not really ashamed to say this, I think our research will hopefully help parties to recruit and retain members. And I think that's actually quite important because our democracy is very much a representative party democracy. So we do need as large a number of people to volunteer in this area as possible, or once again, we will be faced with a situation in which parties become just sort of rather hollow shells or vehicles for ambitious politicians, rather than actually kind of representing real interests or real people. I think if I had to pick one thing that we know now that won't be in a textbook, or at least won't be in a textbook yet, is why so many people joined the Labour Party to both elect Jeremy Corbyn and then to protect him when his own MPs turned against him in 2016. One is the role of what one might call the educated left behind in the Corbyn surge. That is people who have gone to university, have come out, are doing jobs, but are not doing jobs that they see as kind of graduate career jobs that pay as much as some of their peers are earning, and who feel, if you like, that they're not getting their just desserts. And there is, quite a strong sense in the people who have joined the Labour Party for the first time that quite a lot of them are in that, rather more precarious economic situation. The other interesting thing about that surge into the Labour Party is that it has made the Labour Party much more gender balanced than it was. So lots of women have joined the Labour Party since 2015. That may be to do with the kind of kinder, gentler politics, supposedly, that Jeremy Corbyn was offering. And the other thing about that Labour Party surge, which is, I think, really interesting, is that although Jeremy Corbyn is very often portrayed, certainly visually in the media, as someone who is, striding down the street with lots of young people around him, actually the number of people who have joined in their, mid-50s, early 60s is actually quite high. Some 30-odd% of people who joined the Labour Party after 2015 are people who previously belonged to the party and left it in the Blair years, particularly after Iraq, who now feel that they've got their party back, as it were. So when you put all those things together, you have, not surprisingly, perhaps, a kind of left-wing Praetorian Guard made up of quite a wide age range of people who have both material and ideological interests in Jeremy Corbyn staying leader of the Labour Party.